Let's continue the chapter, the proposal. In the last video, I have explained you that Chibukov tells Lomov the same thing as Natalia, that the oxen meadows belongs to them. Now Lomov questions the claim made by Chibukov and asks him to be reasonable. He continues explaining his side of the story to him and gets interrupted by Chibukov. He interrupts and corrects him by mentioning that the only reason that the peasants got to use oxen meadows for free was because it was a disputed land. But now it is very clear to everybody that the Chibukovs own it. He even blames him of not seeing the plan. Chibukov believes Lomov can't prove something to be his when it is not. Lomov insists that he would prove them to be his. Then Chibukov also points out that there is no need to yell. Yelling wouldn't prove anything. He repeats the same words as Natalia and says that he doesn't intend on claiming something that is not his and also doesn't want to give away what is his. He says this out of anger, that if Lomov keeps on arguing about the land, he would rather give it to his peasants for free than to him. Lomov gets offended and asks him how he can give away something that is someone else's property. Now Chibukov gets irritated by the tone in which Lomov chose to speak to him. He mentions that he is twice his age and deserves to be spoken with respect, politeness and all that. Lomov insists that his impolite tone is a reaction to what Chibukov has been doing, that is, claiming Lomov's land. He calls Chibukov a bad neighbor and a grabber. Now, feeling highly disrespected, Stephen asks Lomov to repeat his words. Natalia interferes and asks her father to send the mowers to oxen meadows at once. Still unable to accept what he just heard about himself, he asks Lomov to repeat his words. Natalia claims to possess oxen meadows and refuses to tell them go just because someone else is claiming it to be theirs. Lomov threatens to take the matter to court and prove it to them that he is the real owner. Chibukov accuses Lomov that he is just looking for a chance to go to court, just like all of the people in his family. He insists that he go on with the proceedings. Lomov refuses to listen anything against his family and mentions that they are all respectable personalities, unlike Chibukov's grandfather, who had been tried for embezzlement. Chibukov mentions that insanity and irrationality runs in the Lomovs. Natalia repeats after her father. Chibukov calls Lomov's grandfather an alcohol addict, breaks the news that Lomov's younger aunt ran away with an architect. Lomov mentions that Chibukov's mother was humpbacked. While he was saying this, he felt a pull on his side and head. Thus, he calls for help and water. As the blame game is on, Chibukov calls Lomov's father a greedy gambler. Natalia calls Lomov's aunt a backbiter and that no one could match her level. Lomov complains that his foot is numb, calls Chibukov a plotter, says that he has pain in his heart. He adds that in the last elections, Chibukov was, after saying this, what happened? He does not complete the sentence because he was feeling dizzy. He calls for his hat. Natalia calls his act low, dishonest and mean. Chibukov further calls him with many names. Lomov finally finds his hat and starts asking for directions direction towards the door. With his heart pounding and foot numb, he feels that he is dying. Chubukov screams in anger and tells Lomov not to step foot in his house again. And Natalia tells him to take the matter to court in order to show that they are not afraid. Chubukov calls for the devils to take Lomov along. Natalia comments that Lomov is a devil and is unreliable. Chubukov further calls him names. Natalia is surprised how Lomov first claimed their land to be his own and then possessed the audacity to abuse them. In the process of cursing him and calling him names, Chubukov reveals the real reason behind Lomov's visit that had been overshadowed by the argument related to Oxen Meadows. He couldn't believe his audacity to come with a proposal for her daughter. Now Natalia, unaware about the subject matter, asks her dad, which proposal is he talking about? Then Chubukov clarifies that Lomov came here to ask for Natalia's hand in marriage. See, he came over there to ask for Natalia's hand in marriage, but they start arguing about Oxen Meadows. So, surprised at hearing this, Natalia tells her father that he should have told this to her earlier. He further calls Lomov names and expresses displeasure on seeing his audacity to come there in the evening dress. Natalia is stunned at the news. She falls into the chair and instantly demands to call him back because she also wanted to marry him. Chubukov is not very sure who she is referring to. She tells her father to call him back at the very moment. Chubukov couldn't register Natalia's change of behavior towards Lomov, and thus he calls himself an unhappy man. He intends on shooting himself or hanging himself. Natalia says that she is about to die. Lomov be summoned. Chubukov asks his daughter to calm down and stop yelling. He runs away to call Lomov. Natalia asks her father to hurry. Chubukov returns. He informs Natalia that Lomov is coming. He doesn't intend on talking to him and thus asks her to have a word with him herself. Natalia cries for Lomov. He is unable to accept what just happened. He feels that it is both a burden and a curse to be a grown-up girl's daughter. He wants to cut his throat off because at one moment they cursed, abused and threw him out of their house, and at the other they are calling him back to accept the proposal. See how mean they are. Natalia blames her father for abusing him. Chubukov clarifies that it was not his fault. When Lomov appears at the door, he tells Natalia to handle the situation herself. Lomov enters. Now he is completely exhausted, tired. He doesn't feel well because of his palpitations, numb feet and pulse on one side. Natalia surprisingly, in a completely different tone, gives clarification for how they treated him earlier. She suddenly remembers that the Oxen Meadows are his. While trying to talk about the meadows, he expresses that his heart is pounding and eyebrows twitching. Natalia confirms that the Oxen Meadows are his and asks him to sit down. She accepts her mistake and says that they were wrong. Lomov said that although the land is worth little, but he was just acting on principle. He was just being fair. Natalia tells him to change the topic in the hope of bringing up the proposal. Lomov doesn't stop with his clarifications and again mentions that his aunt's grandmother gave the land to her father's grandfather's peasants. Natalia asks him to change the topic. She thinks, how could she bring him to discuss the marriage proposal? She asks Lomov if he shall resume shooting. Upon being asked, Lomov shares his plans about shooting. He plans on going to the Black Cock after the harvest. He then shares the news that his dog, Guess, suffers difficulty in walking properly. She shows her sympathy and asks how he had gone lame. Lomov is not sure of the reason, but he suspects that he might have got his leg twisted or bitten by some other dog. He highly regrets it as it was his best dog and he had paid a high amount, that is 125 rubles for it. Natalia thinks he had paid a very high price for such a dog. He thinks it was very low for a first-rate dog like Guess. She mentions that he rather gave 85 rubles for her dog Squeezer, who is way better than Guess. Now again they change the topic. Now they are discussing about dog instead of the marriage proposal. He finds it extremely funny that Squeezer is better than Guess. Natalia confidently says that Squeezer is any day better. He is young, but he may develop a bit. He is the best when it comes to points and pedigree, even beats what he has got. Lomov highlights that her Squeezer is an overshot, which means he is bad at hunting. But she doesn't agree with what Lomov is saying about Squeezer being an overshot. He further confirms by saying that Squeezer's lower jaw is smaller than the upper jaw. He mentions that Squeezer is fine when it comes to simply following someone, but not at other things like grabbing something. Natalia brags about her dog being a thoroughbred, the son of harness and chisels. She says that Guess, on the other hand, is old and ugly as a worn-out cab horse. Lomov says that although his dog is old, but is still any day better than Squeezer, to the extent that he won't exchange Guess for 5 Squeezers. He doesn't think of Squeezer as an extraordinary dog. He can be found almost under every bush, and that he is not worth more than 25 rubles. Natalia feels that there is something wrong with Lomov's judgment. First, he falsely claimed Meadows to be his, and then he is saying that Guess, his dog, is better than Squeezer. She feels that he is out of his mind and does not mean what he is saying, which is a trait she absolutely dislikes. She doesn't get why he thinks his dog is better than Squeezer. Lomov says that Natalia thinks he is either blind or foolish, but insists that her dog is overshot. They start fighting again. Natalia says that Lomov is talking rubbish. Guess must be shot dead rather than being compared to Squeezer. Lomov mentions that he is unable to talk on the topic since his heart is pounding very fast. Natalia taunts Lomov and says that those who argue the most know the least. Lomov tells Natalia to stay quiet as he is not feeling well. But Natalia continues arguing and refuses to stop until he accepts that her dog Squeezer is better than his Guess. Lomov exclaims that it could never be true and that her Squeezer is the worst. Natalia says that Guess is old and half dead. He tells her to stop arguing again as his heart is palpitating. Natalia refuses to be quiet. Chubukov enters and asks the matter of their argument this time. Natalia, just like the other time, asks Chubukov who is the better dog, knowing fully well his answer. Lomov, on the other hand, asks him a more direct question. He asks whether his Squeezer is an overshot or not. Chibukov replies by saying that it doesn't matter if Squeezer is an overshot because he is the best dog in the district. Lomov, being unshakable about his opinion, still thinks Guess is better than Squeezer. Now, Chibukov mentions that although Guess has certain good qualities, but he also possesses some defects. He is pure breed, firm on his feet, has well sprung ribs, and all that, but on the other hand, he is old and short in muzzle. Lomov refuses to accept it and starts listing the facts. He begins by referring to the Meronsky hunt where Guess gave a good competition to the Count's dog, but Squeezer was running far behind. Chibukov clarifies that it happened because poor Squeezer got hit in his whip by the Count's dog. Lomov even mentions that the dogs were running after a fox, unlike Squeezer, who began troubling a sheep. Chibukov refuses to agree and mentions that if they continue to argue, he may very easily lose his temper. Thus, he suggests on ending their heated discussion. He thinks that everybody is jealous of others' dogs. Also, he is very well aware how Lomov will carry on the argument by pointing out stuff, but he too remembers everything. Lomov exclaims that even he remembers everything. Chibukov repeats in a teasing manner, I remember too, and then asks him, what does he actually remember? He cries that his heart is pounding and foot has gone numb. Natalia teases Lomov by talking about what kind of a hunter is he who keeps on saying, my heart, my heart. He must catch black beetles, not foxes. Chibukov agrees with Natalia. He says that Lomov must sit at home with his palpitations. He must not go tracking animals, or rather, he could go and do what he is best at, that is, arguing whose dog is better. He again insists on deviating the topic, or else he might lose his temper. He pounces back at Chibukov by insulting him that he is not even an actual hunter. He only goes there to be included in the count. He repeats about his heart while cursing and calling him an intriguer. Chibukov screams and tells him to keep quiet, and both of them start calling each other names. Chibukov threatens Lomov to shoot him like a bird and calls him a fool. Lomov starts getting personal, even though his heart and feet hurt. He specifies that it is well known that his wife used to beat him. Chibukov in return says that everyone knows that he is under the control of his housekeeper. Lomov's heart feels like it's burst and his shoulder came off. He suddenly falls into a chair and calls for a doctor. But Chibukov doesn't stop cursing him while drinking water. Even Natalia doesn't stop cursing, and she suddenly notices that Lomov is lying still as if dead. Natalia, while holding his sleeve, anticipates that he is dead. While panicking and crying, she asks her father to call a doctor. Chibukov asks Natalia, what happened? Natalia cries that Lomov is dead. Chibukov too gets panicked and tries to get some water down his throat, but Lomov doesn't drink. He concludes that Lomov's dead and starts cursing himself. He considers himself the most unhappy and wonders why he hasn't cut his throat or pulled a bullet into his brain yet. He suddenly notices that Lomov is moving and he asks him to drink some water. Lomov, As he gains consciousness, is not sure where he is. He is dazed. Chubukov hurriedly asks him to get married to his daughter at that very moment. He puts Natalia's hand into Lomov's and says that she is willing. He gives them his blessings and asks them to leave him in peace and all that. Lomov, still unaware about his surrounding, asks Chubukov who is he asking him to marry. Chubukov exclaims that Natalia is willing and insists on them kissing each other. Natalia is happy that he is alive and hurriedly says that she is willing to marry him. He asks them to kiss each other. Lomov still doesn't understand until Natalia kisses him. He suddenly remembers, gets excited, and then kisses her hand, but complains that his foot is numb again. Natalia expresses her happiness too. Chubukov feels relieved after marrying his daughter. Natalia again resumes the topic about dogs and manipulates him into saying that Squeezer is better than his guess. Lomov and Natalia argue while Chubukov offers them a drink. Chubukov, tired of them fighting, shouts that it is time for some champagne, and the curtain falls. So this is all about the proposal. So you have seen that they started arguing firstly about Oxen Meadows instead of discussing about the proposal. And secondly, they started discussing about their dogs, Guess and Squeezer, again instead of talking about the proposal. And finally, what happened? When the matter is solved, then again they started arguing. So this is all about the proposal.